Welcome back to the Fixed Ops Roundtable. Len Bellavia is with us to share the state of the automotive retail industry. He is the senior partner at Bellavia Blatt PC, dealerlaw.com, a great friend of the dealer. Len, welcome back to the Fixed Ops Roundtable.
Ted, it's a pleasure to be here as always. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to this event.
Len, you're a big voice for the dealer in our industry, a lot of things happening. And what I want to ask you about this morning, I'm wondering if we're looking far enough out. We've been talking about a lot of the things that have been taking place over the last year or two, and I'll ask you about that, including EVs. But Len, can you paint a picture of how you think the retail auto industry is going to change over the next, let's say, 5 years or so?
Well, I think the relationship between the dealer and the factory is under a test right now. I think it's going to become more strained over the next several years. I'd say between now and 5 years from now, there's going to be efforts by manufacturers to change the franchise relationship in a way that, in my view, is not good for dealers. It's going to, usurp some of the authority that dealers have historically had. I've been, preaching to my Ford dealer clients to be more vocal. Uh, of course, specifically with respect to the EV charging expenses that Ford wants dealers to incur, but not so much for that, as much as it is that I think manufacturers are looking at Ford dealers and saying, let's see how hard dealers push back, because that's a benchmark. It's a measurement in the view of the manufacturer. Well, we know the dealers have all these franchise laws, but if they're not going to invoke them, and I guess we have a free pass to do what we want. So I always say to dealers, of course you fight the fight where you think it's appropriate. You can't do it at every juncture, but not to fight the fight when it's really important to do so, I think sends the wrong message to manufacturers. It emboldens them. So today it's Ford's EV program. Tomorrow it's going to be direct selling or pricing, or buying cars directly through the manufacturer and then to the dealer, or trade-in value. So to leave all of this unprotested by dealers, I think is very risky. So that's why I predict that over the next 5 years, dealers are going to have a harder time, relying on the manufacturers to do the right thing.
Makes a lot of sense. Len, do you think there are things that you feel are not fully understood or are underappreciated by the industry or the dealer community right now in terms of what's happening?
Well, I think consumers and manufacturers are in the same boat. They have this dim view of dealers more so now than they did 10 or 15 years ago. These interrupters, I call them interlopers, but these interrupters come on the scene and pretend that or at least espouse that they have built a better mousetrap. I mean, we've seen that in the used car space with Carvana and Vroom and CarMax, right? They were supposed to be the new vogue of how to retail used cars, and we see that in one form or other, they're kind of fading to black. I mean, they're still in existence, but I think if you scrutinize their business model, even CarMax, who has historically been viewed as the more successful of the three of them, are retrenching. So what I think that manufacturers and consumers need to realize is, although there's always a better way to do things, isn't it funny how it always reverts back to the franchise dealer system? I mean, this goes back decades when manufacturers had these notions of fixed pricing with Saturn or retailing themselves. All of those models were designed to overcome problems in the dealer model. But in my view, all that needs to happen is there needs to be more interaction and communication, because dealers can actually do things better. They can rise to the occasion, please consumers. Now, I worry about with the advent of electric vehicles, there's less brand loyalty, I think, for those that are the few people that are embracing electric vehicles are less concerned about the brand. I mean, there's been studies that say that people that buy the Audis or some of the Kia, some of the new entrees into the marketplace, those aren't previous owners of that brand. So there's going to be a lot of jockeying for position. So I think over the next several years, dealers need to work really hard at maintaining brand loyalty and dealer loyalty, because that is going to be under a great deal of stress over the next several years. So there's a big misunderstanding about the role of the dealer, the capability of the dealer to meet the changing environment, consumer demands, digital selling, making it much more convenient for consumers to get vehicles serviced or delivered, new cars delivered. So there's very little that the franchise dealer can't modify. There's no need to have third-party interlopers or interrupters come on the scene. I know I wouldn't want to invest my money in most of these new ideas because I know that once dealers observe it, just like they did with Carvana and Vroom, they created their own model, and I think better to their models of these competitors. And look what's happening to them. So although there may be blips in the ability of dealers to maintain, market share at times or build a better mousetrap, ultimately they do. So my money is on the franchise dealer. The manufacturers should revisit that idea that separating the responsibility of the franchise dealer is really a bad mistake. There's so much history that they could draw upon to realize that they're better off just tweaking the system as opposed to trying to attack it. And I think consumers are going to realize that, well, it may be fashionable to do things like, buy electric cars directly from manufacturers. It's fashionable until you have to get the car repaired or you need to go to a certain place to get it charged. The bloom is off the rose, I think, on a lot of the notions that, EVs are going to take over. That's a whole separate discussion, and we can probably touch upon that. But I think that that aspect of retailing is not fully understood and appreciated. And I suspect the needle will go back onto the dealer's side, and manufacturers will appreciate the role that the dealers will play in the future. But it may be a struggle before we get, that to be normalized.
And Len, you've done a great job in speaking not only here but around the country. I've seen you and reinforcing the importance of that local dealer in the community and why those dealer franchise laws were created and all that the dealer does locally. And there's no replacing that with any of these other models. And it's really back to the essential nature of that local dealer. I want to come back to the EVs that you just mentioned. A few months back in early fall, there was a big hurricane on the west coast of Florida. A lot of folks were impacted by that. There was a post by Brian Kramer on LinkedIn that had thousands of comments, and he talked about, all right, well, here we are now, post-hurricane, and people with EVs are unable to charge those vehicles. And you know what? It hit a lot of folks, including me, the common sense in that maybe the infrastructure was not quite yet in place. Len, what bottlenecks, for example, like that, do you see in hampering EV adoption over the next 5, 10, even 15 years?
Well, that is one very good example. And the other one, which doesn't rely on a hurricane, it relies on, one of the four seasons, and that is wintertime. Wintertime wreaks havoc on the ability of an EV to remain charged for the projected number of miles. So, 32 degrees is not a bitter cold environment. But in the wintertime, most states in the northern part of the country, 32 degrees is an average winter day. But it's been shown recently that if an EV is projected to travel 280 miles under normal circumstances, a cold temperature, I don't mean freezing, but a 32 or 35 degree day would reduce the range capability by almost 50%. So you got to tell consumers. I mean, consumers are finding out because they're reading about this. It's in a lot of publications that if you're buying a car and you're content with a 280-mile range, well, that 280 may be 180 for one full season of the year. So hurricanes are clearly a problem, but winter lasts more than one day that a hurricane lasts. So that without even addressing the infrastructure and the raw materials needed to create batteries. So I think the underlying message is that there's a lot of, not to sound cynical, but there's a lot of snake oil being sold right now in the marketplace, whether it's startups, government wanting to meet certain mandates, manufacturers wanting to not be the ones to be the naysayers because they want to curry favor with the regulators. So when I hear someone speaking about EVs and the need to get ready, I question what their motivations are. And people that have no stake in this, I think, are the ones that I pay closer attention to. So my view personally is that we're probably 10 years out before we really have to spend a lot of resources on rejiggering, our retail model. So I know manufacturers are talking about by 2030, they want to have 70%, 65% of the vehicles sold being EVs. Just recently, um, manufacturing executives have changed their view. They've cut that projection in half.
Yes.
So by 2030, instead of it being 65%, they're talking about it being 30 to 35%. That's a
Pretty big cut.
margin, pretty big cut. And they're probably trying to be kind because these are also people that have a stake in the outcome. I think if you ask people that are not so jaded, you're probably going to get even more conservative estimates. So if it were my money, I would say, you know what, let's put it on the back burner when 2030 rolls around or 2028. Let's see how the public is embracing the notion of having these range problems, hurricane risks, cold temperatures. So I don't think EVs are ready for prime time. I can afford to say that because I don't have a horse in this race. I just have to advise dealers. And I get calls all the time, should I invest the $1.2 million in the infrastructure, like a Ford dealer, or if you're a Lincoln dealer, invest over $2 million. Well, that was an easier decision last year and the year before when profits were much higher. Dealers can afford to be a little bit irresponsible. But now that things are getting back to normal and profits are being downwardly compressed, I don't know that I would part with $1.2 million or $2 million in 2023 for technology that's not going to really see the light of day until 2035. That's financially irresponsible in my opinion, and that's why I wish dealers would invoke their rights and push back against manufacturers because there's a lot of rainy day money that's needed in this industry. So to part with $1.2 million to $2 million for something that hasn't proven its stripes yet is the epitome of irresponsibility, at least in my opinion.
Something you brought up at a recent Fixed Ops Roundtable, Len, was the importance of looking at vehicle software and who is going to get the profit on that. Um, I understand that a lot of big decisions are being made now and in the very near future that are going to affect dealers for a long, long time. So, in painting that picture of how the industry is going to change, would you address a little bit of that, the vehicle software, and ultimately how big an issue is that going to become for dealers?
Yeah, this all deals with over-the-air updates, right? Connectivity of vehicles, and what happens when a vehicle needs some type of upgrading. Now, I perceive this as the biggest risk that franchise dealers face. And the reason it's a risk is because it's not easy for dealers to appreciate the significance of what is being taken away from them because it sounds innocuous. It seems reasonable to say, well, if something needs an upgrade, if they're going to change, the icon on the main screen, well, who cares? Let the manufacturer do that. But what's being planned, and the manufacturers have each said that to them, this represents a $25 billion revenue source per year.
Billion with a B.
Billion per year. Where does that $25 billion come from? It comes out of the hides of the fixed ops departments of franchise dealers. So to look away is a colossal mistake. And now I'm talking about, for example, just to illustrate the point, a vehicle might come with the capability to have heated seats, but it doesn't mean the manufacturer is going to, the customer is paying for the vehicle with heated seat capability, but subscriptions are going to be required for consumers to actually turn on the switch. So what does that mean? It means the gross profit margin on that line item on the sticker is not going to be realized by the dealer. It's going to be realized by the manufacturer. And that's just one example. I mean, you got cruise control, you've got anything related to navigation. I mean, we could go down the list and say, these are all the profit items that are going to be taken away from the franchise dealer, and the manufacturer is going to, in effect, be selling the component parts of the car after the dealer delivers a shell of a vehicle. That's a bit of an over-exaggeration, but I think it's important to illustrate that effectively that's what's happening. Dealers are going to be relegated to selling, the shell of a vehicle, and then the consumer is going to decide when they want to activate. So effectively, consumers are being charged twice because the hardware is in the vehicle. Now, we can distinguish between, an over-the-air update that's rather benign and those type of things that go to the functionality and the safety of the vehicle that should only be performed by a franchise dealer. And a good example of that is, Tesla recently, when I say recently, within the last year or so, performed a brake upgrade to enhance the braking capability. They took 20 feet or so off the stopping distance. Now, what if and that was done at 3 o'clock in the morning. What if someone had to go to the hospital or deliver a baby, get their wife to the hospital at 3 o'clock in the morning while that over-the-air update grade is being performed? No one's talking about that, but that's something that should be only done at the dealership. But when that's being done en masse around the world at 3 o'clock in the morning in each territory, that's a high-risk proposition. It doesn't have, no one's reviewing the satisfactory performance of it. So that's I think a good illustration of why some things should be left to be performed at the dealer, but right now is being threatened. So dealers need to do what West Virginia did and New Jersey is doing at the current time, and that is sit down with their legislators and explain how risky this is and unsafe for consumers, how bad it is for dealers. And it is important because to the extent that the financial security of a dealership is going to be threatened, well, aside from the dealer principal, who is it going to hurt? It's going to hurt consumers, because if they don't have the integrity of the franchise system, continuity of having a local dealer, then it hurts consumers. So these are all, in West Virginia actually, was the first to legislate this. So every state needs to propose statutory protections that says that over-the-air updates that affect the functionality of the vehicle should be performed by the dealer. The dealer should be paid fair and reasonable retail compensation for performing those updates. Otherwise, dealers are going to be relegated to selling cars at reduced margins, and most of the fixed ops revenue is going to be redirected to the manufacturer. So that's the real threat here, not electric vehicles. We can put that whole discussion, in my opinion, 10 or 15 years down the road. Every dealer should be educated by their fixed ops director that this is an imminent threat. And if they don't pay attention to it, the horse will be too far out of the barn to correct it. So it's up to the dealers to speak to their state dealer association representatives, who in turn should speak to their lobbyists and get these protections on the books, because it's almost like the EV phenomenon is a distraction. So dealers aren't paying attention to these over-the-air updates. So EVs are like the decoy to keep dealers' attention away. And the facility upgrades, well, the manufacturers are plotting to take all this fixed ops revenue away from them. So it's really a clarion call to fixed ops directors and dealers to get on the phone with their dealer reps at the state associations and do what some of these other states are starting to do, which is to say to the manufacturer, this you can do over the air, and this has to stay inside the service department for the benefit of the protection of the of consumers.
We're speaking today, everyone, to Leonard Bellavia. He is the senior partner at Bellavia, Blatt, dealerlaw.com, a great friend of the dealer. Len, last question for today. You've described a lot of the fundamental changes that dealers need to be aware of. That business model is at stake. And to be successful over the next 5 to 10 years, any other advice that you want to share with our audience today?
Well, look, along the lines of all of these technology changes, let's, for the sake of discussion, say that EVs are going to start, growing. They will. I'm not saying that they're going to go away, but maybe they won't have the same degree of market share. But if I'm changing an electric battery on a vehicle that costs $8,000, I don't want to get paid a stipend, a $500 flat, to change out that battery. The dealer should be getting full retail markup on parts, particularly with respect to electric vehicles, because the batteries will fail and they will need change. So I don't want to sound self-serving, because, as you know, Ted, my pet project in the late 90s was to fight to get retail reimbursement both with respect to parts and labor under warranty. And now here it is 20-something years later, and every state in the country has a statute that entitles dealers, if they ask and if they properly request it, to obtain retail reimbursement. So this has been my cause celeb. I have a whole department in my law firm that does this for dealers. So my outreach is to say to fixed ops directors, this is the time, if you haven't done it, to do it immediately. If you've done it in the past, well, your labor rate continually goes up, and especially in this period of time where interest rates and costs are going up, cost of labor across the board, you need to resubmit for an increase in your warranty labor rate at least every 2 years. And I maintain, this is, might sound like a sales pitch, but I verily believe this, that it's a legal procedure. You should be calling your attorney, not your ex-parts manager. You shouldn't be asking your service manager to do this. I always call that fixed ops malpractice. And the example I use when I get a dealer on the phone is I say, look, it's not illegal for me to file my own tax return, but, and as smart as I think I am, I don't know anything about the nuances of the Internal Revenue Code. So why would I not ask my accountant to file my tax return? Why? To save a few $1,000s when he's going to get me deductions that far exceed that? It's the same concept. You potentially stand to bring in hundreds of thousands of dollars a year by doing this the right way. So to give it to someone other than your lawyer is fixed ops malpractice. So don't be afraid. You shouldn't be looking to save the fee, because the cost of saving, a fee of less than, let's say, $10,000 or $8,000 is more than overcome by the increase. The increase is usually $100,000 to $300,000 for parts and labor each year. So be intelligent about it. Don't be afraid to ask for advice and get the right kind of help, because that, over the next 5 years, as more and more market share goes to EVs, although it won't be substantial, it's enough where you don't want to be a dealer changing out an $8,000 battery and getting a $500 reimbursement. So think long term, but do it now, because there's plenty of income to enjoy. And also, to the extent that manufacturers are going to downwardly compress the margins on new vehicle sales, well, fixed ops is the new front end. It's really going to be the place where dealers are going to look to supplant the gross income that is going to go by the boards if, over-the-air updates and direct selling and factory pricing is going to be the wave of the future. Then fixed ops is going to become that much more important. So if you're not getting retail parts and labor reimbursement under warranty, then you better get it soon. You're going to find out that's going to be the department that is going to be much more meaningful in the future than it ever has been in the past.
Everybody, Leonard Bellavia, the senior partner at Bellavia Blatt. He is the dealer advocate. We highly encourage our audience, as many of the Fixed Ops Roundtable dealers do, to work with Len and his firm. Easy to find at dealerlaw.com. Retail automotive runs in his blood. He knows this industry inside and out, and he goes to bat for the dealers. So, Len, great to have you here and hear about the state of the industry at the beginning of 2023. Congratulations to you on all the success that you and your firm are having, and just really honored to have you here at the Roundtable.
Ted, always a pleasure. I appreciate it. Best to all of your dealers and fixed ops directors, and a healthy and happy 2023.
Everybody, Leonard Bellavia from dealerlaw.com here today at the Fixed Ops Roundtable.
Thank you.